I'd like to welcome all of you to this very happy gathering and CSWAP business meeting. We have here Diane Whitmore-Schanzenbach, who's going to introduce Hilary, and I will actually give Hilary her word after that.
It is my great pleasure to introduce today Hilary Williamson-Hoynes. Hilary is the Haas Distinguished Chair in Economic Disparities and a professor in the Department of Economics and the Goldman School of Public Policy at UC Berkeley. She is the winner of this year's Carolyn Shaw Bell Award. You know lots about Hilary. You know that her work is at the intersection of public economics and labor economics, so something more akin to the stuff that this room likes to study. Just kidding. Because you converted me, actually. I mean, you totally converted me. She does work on poverty and tax and transfer programs like the Earned Income Tax Credit, welfare, and food stamps. Her research, her excellent research, is characterized by rigor and relevance, and she has got quite a CV to show for herself. She's a co-editor of the American Economic Review and has lots of affiliations like the National Bureau of Economic Research, UC Davis's Center for Poverty Research, the Institute for Fiscal Studies, and so on. Many of you know Hilary, but something you might not know about Hilary is that she is a tireless and effective teacher and mentor. When I went to put together a nomination for her this year for the Carolyn Shaw Bell Award, you need, I think, to turn in 3 letters of support, maybe 4, something like that. And when I sent out an exploratory email to see if anybody wanted to write letters, we received 20 letters of support in honor of Hilary. These letters came from current students and former students from all sort of walks of life, all ranks today. Colleagues, co-authors, and even people who have no explicit professional relationship with her, who consider her a mentor. I'm going to quote from one of those letters. She writes, "While I, like most of the rest of the profession, have every reason to know who Hilary is, Hilary knows me only because she has chosen to be a generous mentor. Hilary was never my supervisor, professor, collaborator, or campus or departmental colleague, but she's always been so interested in not only my research, but also my professional development. She's provided valuable feedback on many of my papers. She manages to do so with an enviable combination of straightforward candor and tact." You can tell she was raised in the Midwest. Across the 20 letters of support for Hilary to win the Carolyn Shaw Bell Award this year, we have dozens and dozens of examples of the energy, optimism, and enthusiasm with which she interacts with the rest of us and our research. I think I was one of Carolyn Shaw Bell's final students at Wellesley College. She was long retired, but I worked with her as a research assistant on some of her work, and she was very generous with me in those final days of her career. And one of the things that Carolyn really focused on was trying to instill confidence in young women. And so I want to finish with one story about Hilary and her confidence. So this past summer, the Hamilton Project sponsored a poverty summit where they commissioned 14 different papers by economists mostly on policies to potentially reduce poverty in the United States. Hilary wrote a terrific paper on expanding the Earned Income Tax Credit along various dimensions. And our keynote speaker was President Bill Clinton. Okay, and so he was on his game and in the ways that he can be sometimes, right? And so he came and he gave a speech that went on for a long time, and so, but he seamlessly wove together real policy analysis where he really engaged, actually, particularly in Hilary's EITC proposal. He mentioned it a number of times. I feel like he talked about it for a good 10 minutes. He did go on quite a while. And he wove in stories about other people, and then sort of finally he was ending, and he came to do, all the authors were sitting in the front row, and he came just to, handshake everyone, and we were, so excited, and he was great. And several of the other letter writers were in this front row, just waiting for the quick handshake from the former president. He gets halfway down, and Hilary stops him, and she wants to talk about the EITC, and he wants to too. And she says, "Hi, I wrote the EITC paper." And he, sort of taken aback that she's going to stop him. And she says, "I'm Hilary, with one L." And he doesn't get it. like there's another Hillary he should know. And she stopped him, and like I said, several of the other letter writers, me, Melissa Carney, Liz Stewart, Liz Cassio, sorry, and I looked on with just glee, watching her engage with the President of the United States, talking details of the EITC. That's our Hillary. So I'm pleased to introduce my friend and co-author, Hilary Hoynes, with one.
I tried to figure out a way to weave that into my remarks, and I couldn't figure out because it was so silly. You know, it's like classic just saying something about really thinking about it, and he had no idea what I was saying, and I thought it kind of ended our conversation, which disappointed me because I was enjoying talking about the EITC with him. But so thanks for that, Diane. So, you know, just thank you to Marjorie, to the CSWEP board. I'll have some comments at the end about CSWEP and, you know, what this institution has meant just for one person. But I'll save that till the end. I obviously want to thank Diane for her friendship and co-authorship and for, you know, putting my name into this wonderful pool, and also to Marion Bittler, who I think helped out Diane in some aspects of this. I am definitely not someone who is normally short on words. I don't think anybody would describe me as that, but I have to admit to not really knowing what to say. I give talks all the time, like, that was a great talk, Emmy. Like, I know how to do those, but I don't have any PowerPoint here. This is it, you got a blue screen and me. So I've been sort of ruminating about this over the last couple of weeks and over the holiday break, and I was thinking, Marjorie told me, I think you said, be personal, be sincere, and I thought to myself, I should be light. And so as a good student, I started by looking at the text of the award, which, as all of you can see in front of you, says, the Carolyn Shaw Bell Award is given annually to a person who has furthered the status of women in the economics profession through example, achievements, increasing our understanding of how women can advance in the economics profession, or by mentoring others. So I was sort of reading that and trying to see where in there did I see myself. And I thought that there were two pieces in that where I could see myself. And so those two pieces are promoting women through example and the importance of mentoring. And so I sort of collected some thoughts that come from some different chapters of my life to try to put some example behind how I think I have come to think it's very important and very much enjoy those two aspects of what this award, the Carolyn Shaw Bell Award, is awarding. And in doing this, interestingly, you know, I invited some good friends and mentors to sit at the table today, and I realized only in writing this up yesterday morning that I had somebody at my table from every one of those chapters, so that seemed really great. And I wanted to say, before going on and talking about those 4 chapters, that I think part of how we become who we are as grown-up professionals, especially within the context of thinking about this award and CSWEP, is the importance of being exposed to female peers and mentors. Speaking for myself, I feel equally baked into the person that I am today by both male and female peers and mentors that I've had the fortune of spending some time around. So that's a theme, I think, for creating what we end up to be as professionals. So chapter 1, where does chapter 1 have to start? You know, your family. Chapter 1 is your family, and you thank your parents who are here. So I want to talk about 2 aspects of my family growing up and continuing, and one is sort of the personal and one is the professional. My family, I think by most observers, would be characterized as a female-dominated family. I have a very strong mother. My mom, Nancy Williamson, is here. I have 2 sisters, as well as a brother, and my father, Jeff Williamson. I think it was a pretty female-oriented household, I would say. But it wasn't particularly gendered, which is unusual. grew up in the 1960s. I don't know. It seemed like a pretty unusual household from what I compared my classmates and friends and their households. And when I was thinking about that, I realized my perception of my parents growing up is that I saw them as a team. They both worked outside the home. They both did things they really enjoyed, yet somehow the household functioned pretty well. And that was, in reflection and my own adulthood and trying to combine work with children is really something I've thought about a lot, and have the good fortune to have a great partner who isn't here. He's great, but he's not here. Kind of doing this all with me. So there's that aspect. But at the same time, I also feel some sort of destiny. And 5 economists, Emmy, that's pretty impressive. I think I have 4, and I was gonna make a big deal about that. So my dad, Jeffrey Williamson, is an economist. He retired from Harvard 10 years ago. I don't know, last 5, 2, recently. My mom, Nancy Williamson, spent most of her career as a senior professional at the Institute for Research on Poverty in Madison, and I will say as a young assistant professor, I would get stopped as often about people remarking as knowing my mom as knowing my dad. I would get the following comment: without your mom, I could never have coded up that estimator. Pre-Stata, those of us old enough in the room to remember doing that, it was a pretty specialized skill. And so I sort of grew up in this great, and I'm like the linear combination of my parents, for sure. My mom worked on the stuff that I study, my dad had the educational track that I pursued. The apple didn't fall very far from the tree. But my grandfather, my dad's dad, was also an economist. He was a public finance economist, taught at Wesleyan, and worked for the Office of Price Analysis, Stabilization, under FDR. So he was sort of a applied macro public finance guy. So I have 2 daughters who so far, while simultaneously being acutely aware of this lineage, have been doing essentially running away from economics. But I hold out some hope that I met somebody today who majored in French and is now applying to grad school in economics. So you never know what life's course will take you. So that's the personal side. The professional side is that I was really thinking about the fact that my household was a household where there were always graduate students around. We had a lot of parties. This is Wisconsin. We drank a lot of beer, or I didn't, I suppose, but it seemed to be being drunk. And there was always graduate students around. And I'll have to say that I know some of my dad's graduate students. Actually, one of them came in to congratulate me and then had to run out to do some interviewing. So I grew up in an environment where it was clear that these relationships were important, and it just seemed totally normal that you'd have people over to your house who were your students. And I realized how unusual that is until I sort of got out in the world and saw a different way. Part of that might have been a Wisconsin thing, but I think a lot of it were my parents. And so the lesson, okay, so not all the chapters will be this long, the family's important, but the lesson that I took from this, number 1 was, of course, always listen to your parents. That's kind of a no-brainer. But I think more importantly, it's leading by example. They were not telling me what to do, but it was leading by example, and I think that that's something that I've really noticed being important. Just show up and lead by example, and that's a really good start. So that's chapter 1. Chapter 2 takes place in graduate school. I went to Stanford. I was there between 1987 and 1992. And there I got fabulous training there in labor and public, and they were really important years. If I'm honest, I wouldn't say there was much mentoring going on there, but I didn't even know that I wasn't getting it. So one of the things that I want to come back to in moving from just being there and just showing up and leading by example and trying to do things that are a little bit more proactive, I feel like over my career, I've sort of moved. And I think part of it is the realization that I wasn't probably not that unusual. I didn't really know what I even needed to know. I didn't know what I knew and what I didn't know or what I needed to know. And so I think that there's roles that we can play to try to fill in those gaps. However, Penny, was there a single female faculty member at Stanford when we were there? I'm not sure if there was. I was trying to remember that. However, my good friend and colleague, Penny Goldberg, was one of my classmates. And we kind of broke the bank for women in the first year PhD class at Stanford. So it was a very female-dominated class. And one where I think we really were a big part of the sort of top tier of graduates the year that Penny and I went on the job market. So it was an interesting mix of not really having a lot of mentors, speaking for myself, not really even knowing what I needed from a mentor, but realizing how important the people that you surrounded yourself with are. And Penny has been someone who I was very connected to early, and now through working together at the AER, as I am your dutiful servant, co-editor, has been a wonderful kind of circularity in my life. So the lesson from that is to surround yourself with the best people and be part of a great team, and that's super valuable. So chapter 3 is UC Berkeley, which it turns out is also chapter 5, because I was at Berkeley as an assistant professor, and now for the last 2 years have been back in the policy school and the Department of Economics just recently. Thinking back to the years, especially when I was an assistant professor, Berkeley was a very strong department full of women. I think if I counted correctly, there were maybe 4 tenured women on the faculty when I was there. I was just trying to pull all these numbers together without having a really clear memory. And another equal numbered size of assistant professors over the years that I was there. And that made Berkeley a standout, I think, as a top 10 department at that time in the early 1990s. And in thinking about that, it's surely the case that being in a department like that, created role models for me. I think speaking personally, especially people who I saw combining top scholarship with parenting, which was obviously something was very much on my mind, or not obviously, but was. But at the same time, in thinking back, I think much more influential to who I've become is seeing the senior faculty that I observed while I was at Berkeley and their dedication to the mission of training and mentoring graduate students. And there's no better example to that for me but to David Card, who's here today, who I think told me the other day when we were watching 2 days worth of practice job talks, which David organizes for the cohort of students, a second job talk just at the end of the term when everyone is going completely insane. I think you said that it's been 125 students that you've been the chair of a committee on over the years, which sort of blew my mind. And I had the great fortune to sort of co-advise some students at the end of my time at Berkeley in the 90s, and was just sort of amazed by watching the skill with which David could help a student on their own sort of arrive at the right topic. They might come into it with some ideas that were usually not always that great, but they would end up somewhere that was very much where they wanted to be, but they sort of did it on their own with his guidance, and it was just sort of magical to watch. And the commitment was just phenomenal in terms of the David Card diaspora that exists around the world. So the lesson from my years at Berkeley are absolutely just watch and learn. So the last chapter was my time at UC Davis. I spent 13 years at UC Davis, and I would say if there's a more well-functioning, friendly department out there, I would love to see it. I've never been in one. I've never spent any time anywhere that was just really as tremendous as the people and the cooperation and the collaboration at Davis. And I was lucky enough to be there in a time by just virtue of a strong economy and a sort of mean reversion. It was kind of a small department when I got there. We did an enormous amount of hiring and a real time of building the department and really improving our graduate program. And the end result of those years that I was there, I think we had 5 or 6 full professor women, as it turned out, in our relatively small department when I left, and another strong cohort of junior faculty. And if I'm not mistaken, I think at some point CSWEP, I think when Marianne, so my colleagues Doug Miller and Marianne Page here are from UC Davis, I believe when Marianne and Ann Stevens both were promoted to full professor, someone at CSWEP might have noted that we might have the most full professor women of any department in the United States. I don't know if that was ever actually determined. Do you remember that, Fran?
I'm
Yeah, I tried to look on the web for it because I had a recollection, but I couldn't find it. So it is a very unusual place. And, you know, I probably had a very small amount to do with that. But it was one of the things that I really learned about that was the power of bringing, I'll tell you a story. I remember Katie Russ was here. She was briefly here and she left. I remember Katie Russ, macroeconomist, international macro person. She was just tenured 2 years ago, I think. I remember when she told me many years later a story of how when she came to Davis and met with me on a one-on-one meeting, it was really influential in her deciding that Davis would be a good place to be. And I thought, really, what in the world did I do? Like, I have no idea what our conversation was. And she basically just related the fact that I must have put on a good act. She said, you just seem so balanced and, you know, engaged in your scholarship, yet, you know, talking about your children in the same conversation. And it just felt like this is a place that creates the opportunity for balance and something. I'm not really sure what. But I think in the process, what I learned from that is, again, this notion of kind of, if you build it, they will come, you know, just kind of being there is a big part of making opportunities for others. And it's natural that people who are like you, in this case it was a young woman and an older woman, that obviously created some resonance for her. And it's easy to forget that in a discipline that is still relatively minority women. So with those 4 chapters, where does that take me? So I definitely feel very committed and deeply engaged in mentoring and training graduate students. And I did have some numbers. It's no 125, but I got a few more years to go. But I think I had 29 students in the 13 years that I was at Davis, and another 10 in the time that I was at Berkeley earlier. And a good share of those were women. Almost half of those students were women. And in my own personal best year, 2 years ago, I wrote, because I had all the files on my computer, 11 job market letters. That was pretty awesome. And 9 of those were for fresh PhDs, and 6 of the 9 all had joint searches with other economists. And they're all, Lisa Shulkind is here, one of that cohort, and they're all gainfully employed, and it makes you, you know, it's a great feeling to know that it can all work out. I've learned along the way, and only recently has this really become clear in the professional sense, that graduate students are students for life. For those of you who've been doing this a lot longer than I have, you already know this, but the professional side, you know, you keep writing letters. That it really is a contract. You know, when you try to convince them to enter your program to get a PhD, you don't really, I didn't realize that this is you're bound. There's a kind of connection there. And it's all, the professional side of that has only more recently become apparent to me as my own students are aging and cohorts. But the personal side is also kind of for life. And to sort of get back to, you know, the kind of household that I was raised in and graduate students sort of always being around, I realized that I've kind of been doing that in my life as well. It was, for a number of years, I worked in Davis and lived in another city, so it wasn't that kind of a relationship, but I did have my own almost annual, what we called the Brat Fest, which was bratwurst shipped in from Madison, Wisconsin to Berkeley, and I would have all the students over, and we'd have brats and beer in my backyard, which was really fun. So while I started, I think, as a young professor, when I kind of realized that I was a woman in a discipline that didn't have that many women, I came starting with the idea that just being there was a really important signal and model for others. And for a long time, that seemed just about right, or what I could imagine. But over time, I've definitely adopted a more proactive role. And I've been thinking about that a little bit, and I realized that like, things. Once you're in the business for a while, there are things that you forget, or even knowledge. How tenure works, the importance of communicating with senior faculty and when, how to say no or when to say yes, how journals work, how to get invited to give a seminar somewhere, the importance of saying no deserves repeating a second time. You know, this is like stuff you learn along the way, and I didn't know these things, but probably most assistant professors don't know these things, but I feel like I didn't even know I was supposed to know, and I didn't know about I was supposed to ask to get that. So I've decided that I've moved towards a more, an approach to say more as opposed to wait to be asked. And as my husband tells me all too often, I tend to overshare. Perhaps the Hilary with one L is an example of that. So that's, I guess, where I've come to realize who I am, and maybe oversharing is better than undersharing. And so my message to all of you is to just pass it on. Like, we all have knowledge. You know, you don't need to wait to be asked. Just pass it on, and I think that goes a long way. So just in closing, I wanted to just thank CSWEP for what you all have been doing for so long, much longer than I've been in this profession. I absolutely keenly remember the first time I knew what CSWEP was, and it was definitely through the report in the paper annual, it was in Papers and Proceedings, right? That's where the report on the status of women would show up, and I remember seeing those tables about the representation of women through the different levels. And so I thought I would pull out a few of those numbers just for kicks. So in 1992, when I got my PhD, according to the annual report that I was able to grab online, 24% of new PhDs were women, 24% of assistant professors were women, and 6% of full. So for the most recent year, in 1913, I'm sure the data is ready for this year, but I didn't have that, 35% of new PhDs are women, so that's 24 to 35. 28% of assistant professors are women, 24 to 28, and fully 12% of full professors, so a doubling from 6 to 12. I remember looking forward to that paper newsletter coming in my mailbox with stories about people in different professional situations, career advice, career development, job market advice. Since that time, of course, CSWEP has really expanded the scope of what it does. I think I've heard so much from Diane and others about the cement mentoring workshops that unfortunately I had never participated as a mentor in, mostly because I always taught winter quarter at Davis, and it's just you can't stay an extra couple days at the meetings. All these activities have clearly really kept CSWEP very relevant. And that seems very remarkable over for the relatively short time period that I've known about the activities. So I really appreciate Marjorie, current leadership, all the former leaders that are in the room. And I hope that CSWEP continues to stay relevant. But I guess maybe my last comment is when my daughters are rising assistant professors of economics in some future decade, maybe CSWEP won't be necessary. So thank you very much.
So Hilary, on behalf of CSWEP, I want to present you with the Carolyn Shaw Bell Award.
Thank you very much.
And there's another piece to the award, but being a very frugal organization and spending the AEA's money, it's being shipped from last year's winner to this year's winner directly. It's a requirement, actually, that Hilary's name will go on this big plaque with all of her predecessors, and that it must be displayed prominently at Berkeley so that everyone gets to see it. And think about, maybe I could do that too. Okay, I have,
Thank you.
So thank you very much. Thank you for an inspiring talk. I want to make a few comments in conclusion. First of all, using current parlance, but reversing the generations, I would like Nancy and Jeff Williamson, and also Mansour and Alice Nakamura to stand. Okay. Nancy, okay. Oh, wait, stay standing. reverse parlance, good job. Okay, and I've asked if Jeff and Alice might want to just say 1 minute about this.
I think I'm up here for comic relief. It's all about nature and nurture, Hilary. Let's start with the nature. It is 5, actually, and I didn't count Nancy, so it's 6. What you failed to mention are 2 women. No, not counting them either. They don't count yet. Your grandmother on Nancy's side perhaps did not teach economics. Maybe she did, I don't know, but she taught in high school in Portland, Connecticut. So that's one teacher, another teacher. Your grandmother on my side taught in Middletown, Connecticut in the high school. Both, of course, did it in the 1920s when that's what women with degrees did at that time. That was practically all they could do. But then we go on, you mentioned my father and your grandfather, Kossuth was his name, Kossuth Williamson. His first appointment when he left Harvard with his PhD shortly after World War I was in Princeton. Princeton failed to see his great value, and he didn't make tenure. That's the bad news. The good news is then he went out to Wesleyan University for 40 years. But there was more good news. The bad news was delivered by Woodrow Wilson. Well, that's not bad if you're going to get turned down. And that's not all. His grandfather was a circuit rider teacher. Now, I'm sorry that Claudia and Larry are not here because it would get better laughs. But he was a circuit rider around schools. We're talking about the 19th century. We're talking about the 1840s, teaching kids. And he wrote a primer that apparently survived for a number of decades, used by Alabama students. And I figure if he was a rider, he rode a horse from village to village to do his thing. And therefore, he used that horse to win the race between schooling and technology. Now that would have gotten a better laugh, wouldn't it, Claudia and Larry? Well, anyway, that's the nature side. But then there's a nurture side. And that is, I want to take full credit for this, because when Hilary was, I guess, about 6 months old, when she was being put to bed, putting to bed in naps and for night's sleep, I would whisper in her ear, supply and demand, supply and demand, supply and demand. And it worked, see? We're proud of you, Hilary.
Many people have already said things I was going to say, so I won't say them. So you can clap on that, okay? In addition, I just wanted to honor the people who showed up here in honor of Hilary, in particular faculty members at UC Davis and Berkeley, and faculty members who showed up from 3 institutions.